All right, everybody, welcome to the Phil Lately Mind Increasing podcast from SIO with Ryan Quick and Raymond St. Martin.
Hey
I'm
there.
trying to use my cool radio voice, but that's okay because I won't be doing this next week. Raymond will. Hey, that's my way of saying we're going to alternate this.
I like it.
Okay. All right. So if you tuned in last week, then you know that this week we've decided we're going to talk about education and healthcare in return, as the NFT world has something to do with them. Now, when we got started with this, we asked ChatGPT to tell us what industries and fields it understood NFTs to have impact in, and it came up with 65 in. And we looked at those and went, wow, that's a lot of stuff. But some are better than others, and so we went through it ourselves and said, okay, from a SIO's perspective, which is generally around being invested in the storytelling of an object, of which a digital asset is absolutely an object. Which ones are most interesting to us because the story is sort of right there on the surface and still hasn't been told. So we kind of we went through that list, picked our favorites, and we decided we'd start with the ones where we overlapped. That is education and healthcare. And I'm going to shut up now and let you pick whichever one you want to start with, and we'll go from there.
I'm a huge user of Coursera, but was a very early adopter to everything that I could learn online. Just if I could find something, I want to learn it. And it was interesting how these different schools at the time, like Stanford, for example, taught their entrepreneurial course online for free. And there were people from all over the world, literally like thought leaders, amazing technologists working for Fortune 100 companies, and some of the top tech companies in Silicon Valley were in my think tanks and in my groups. And we created amazing projects together. We gained an incredible education. This was back in, call it like 2010, 2011. And when you completed the course, you got this certificate of completion that sort of sat out there, and it's like, whatever, like maybe people will care about it one day, but really you were doing it for the education itself. And it seems to me that, education and the education that you receive it's important to have it quantifiable, but can it be codifiable? And can it go from being this transitory sort of like this impermanent experience that you have, to really create some permanence around it, this permanent record that represents a thing that you did, the class that you took, your contribution to that course, what you learned, and maybe even like how it impacted and affected what you've done in life and what you've done throughout the world. The story of my education, where I got this information from, I think is really important. But I also think that the LinkedIns of the world and what Coursera has grown into now, where you can go to Coursera and you can see the courses that people have taken, the certificates that they've gained. If they've got all the way certificate, you can even get your master's in some cases online and have it be provable. But when you have multiple sources that you've been learning from, and you have an education that's been gleaned from multiple different universities and platforms, how do you have an actual permanent, transportable and shareable thing that represents your education? That can be kept private. It could be made public to those that might be interviewing you, or if you're looking to work on a project. For example, I think about all the GitHub repositories you've contributed to, Ryan, over your time, or where do those exist? Where do they exist in one thing that represents my education that's owned and controlled by me?
So you want something more than just a transcript. In other words, everybody can say they passed, English 160 or whatever, but that's not capturing what you're talking about.
Not at all, but I think that transcript's also important, right? But that's another level, another layer, another piece of the puzzle, if you will, to say that, I graduated from Georgetown University and I took these courses and I'm transferring, I'm going to get my master's at, the University of Florida. And when I go to get my master's at the University of Florida, my transcript comes with me, it gets sent, it goes through all these proper channels, they receive it and they go, yes, it takes some time typically to get a hold of it. It's not easy to get your transcript sent. Sometimes it's wrong, actually. And there's no real check and balance to get it finished. It has people that I know, it's wasted a lot of time getting through that transcript process. So I think having this concept of having a non-fungible token that represents my education, that has all of its attributes, right? Just the whole, the SIO system that is related to education, that is stored in one thing called, my education history, that can be sometimes parsed out privately, sometimes publicly. It can be displayed publicly, but there might be some things that I've taken that maybe I don't like that I took, that I want to keep private. There could be courses I didn't pass that I took that I also want to keep private, but allows me in a moment's time, literally a moment's time, to give another person access to all of that information. That doesn't exist right now. There is no accepted, trusted, non-immutable, non-fungible token, right? No SIO that we call it, no SIO that represents my education and all of its attributes, that allows viewing, transferability, and visibility. So I think that's a huge market. If I were Coursera, or I was somebody getting into this space, I would look at all of the different learning channels, all the different possible ways to learn, and to take courses. I mean, even street knowledge, right? Even, courses I take that aren't even from accredited universities. Acupuncture, for example, or acupressure sometimes is important. Philosophy majors make great coders, I've heard, or great developers or architects, not necessarily computer science, but philosophy and deep thinking is really, really important, and reason is really important in solving a lot of the problems that we face today in technology. So all of these different pieces, I think, are extremely, extremely important to have a place, a thing that represents, Raymond, my SIO, and this is the SIO that represents my education, that is attached to everything that I put there. And to have it be a non-fungible token is extremely important.
Okay, so I got like lots of questions, but that last one kind of, so up till now I've been thinking of what you were talking about as this, you getting tokenized enrichment as you do things. Like you've got this bucket, you're filling it up with all of these classes and concepts and things you've learned from, you got your rope tying merit badge when you were a kid, all the way up to, your acupuncture. But then at the end there, you just said, my education is a thing.
The thing.
Now that's an intangible. And so for me, representing the intangible is one of the things that I like, right? Because technically there's markets. You could fill this bucket up with real things already. You could go and get your merit badge and plunk it in the thing, and your certificates and all that. You could have like a little bucket of that stuff that you photocopy and you send to everybody. But this notion of who you are as an educated person, that's different, right? And so, I guess my first question is that the SIO plug? Because ultimately we're trying to think about how SIO plays into this world. And yeah, for those people, that are kind of wondering, we're not ignoring or putting blinders on. We recognize, in order to be able to bring our vision of what stories are out there, it will take us developing the market where it might not be. So, if Coursera doesn't have the stuff that it needs in order to be able to fill the digital asset bucket, we're absolutely interested in helping them do so. But if I'm trying to be you for a minute, isn't the thing you're actually talking about who you are, with education being one of the things that makes you who you are?
100%. 100%. It could be a book that I read that impacted my life. It could be the ranking of the books that I've read, the number of books that I've read, the type of books that I've read represent my education as much as a class that I've taken, even sometimes even more.
Yeah, like for example, for me, when I was debating when I was debating graduate school, I had two paths that I was going to go down. I was either going to go do a PhD in English Lit, or I was going to go into religion. I liked both equally, but I read this book called Searching for God at Harvard. Ari Goldman, for those folks that want to go grab it. And it's basically about his story in hunting, where he could learn more about things. And that book which wasn't on a reading assignment or anything like that. I just happened to find it one day. That actually tilted me towards the religion path. So, when I went to apply for graduate school, I got accepted lots of places. And, one of the things I wondered about today is, I got accepted to the PhD program at Chicago for English with money. And of course, my parents were super excited if I would go to Chicago to do that. Instead, I opted to go to New Haven for religion instead, even though I didn't get money. And I attribute that to that book. That decision was there. Now, that doesn't show up in my education, that book that you're talking about. But for me, that charted the path of where I went. Mm-hmm. And there's no way to track that. So, that's kind of what I was thinking SIO was going to aim for, was those kind of moments.
The rest of it is all, table stakes, right? Like making your transcripts that are already digital assets somewhere, turning them into non-fungible tokens and making them accessible through a wallet. But how you correlate this into a thing that is education, that is represented as the object, how you objectify and create an object out of education, I think is really important on the social identity. But the reason, because this all happened in the cloud, right? It could happen in the cloud. It doesn't need to be, a non-fungible token. The blockchain doesn't even need to exist in that world. Yet, I would argue that it has to exist in that world, because in order to be trusted, it has to be immutable, it has to be transparent, and it has to be recorded in multiple places and verified from different sources before it would be accepted as a thing outside of the institution that is already trusted to deliver that transcript.
For me, the reason that I was interested in the education perspective wasn't so much around the accreditation or curricula vitae of what I've been through or what someone had been through. It was, for me, more of a means to attach knowledge to a tradable thing, right? Like we have books, but they're heavyweight, and not heavyweight in the digital sense, right? They come with hard to manage rights. They've got lots of information of which you may only want one. On the flip side, you've got search engines, and they will provide you an instant answer, relevant or not, to what you're after. And then you've got now AI, which is trying to bridge the gap and give you a little bit more information than what the search engine can give you. But it learns based on how it thinks of the world. Thinking, loaded term, I get. Anyway, what I was thinking was education could represent information in what's the word that I'm looking for? Anyway, I'll remember the word in a minute. Anyway, when you're working with text, like there's this idea of a complete thought. A lot of times when you see a quote, you'll get, especially in the news or something, you'll get like a sound bite, it's like one or two sentences or whatever. But in real life, you're taking something out of context. So there's this notion of the context itself where you get everything contained in one. That's kind of what I was thinking education could come to represent, so that when you put out and when you're an author or a publisher and you're putting out a new Kindle book, right, you can also break at the same time you put out the book in chapters or whatever that the author developed. You could have AI or readers who've looked at the book ahead of time come along and create these content relevant or content complete chunks of information that come along with it. And you could actually monetize or collect that, so that, if I wanted to go out, to a library and I search on, knot tying, I don't have it right here, but usually when I'm bored in meetings, I sit here and tie knots. You can't see me because my hands are down, but I'm tying knots. And so if I want to learn about knot tying, I can go to lots of different resources to find a knot. Some will tell me different ways to tie the same knot. And so I'll test different ways of doing it. But what you could do in that same type of sense from an education standpoint is say, I'm interested in learning how to tie a one-handed double alpine loop, right? And now I can get that complete set of information from 25 different sources, which I can consume using my education token. I can spend X amount to gain, 5 different sources of knowledge from 5 different places at one time without having to spend the time hopping through the books. Now, I like spending the time hopping through the books, but I think that model has changed for the current generations, and I don't think it's coming back. Right? All of us older people are like, you should just read the whole book. You should just listen to the whole album, and that's not happening anymore, right? So I think this is a good way for authors and content generators to be able to still participate in the world of education, the world of knowledge, without necessarily having to force somebody into a paradigm they may not like. Did I make any sense there at all?
You did. And I think one of the other points you made when we were discussing this, that I think is really important, if people don't understand Brian's background in finance and, in technology, I really love your take on the notion of using, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, to represent the credits and vouchers. This, and especially as you said, especially in situations where they can be interchanged and earned incrementally. Talk about that for a second, about how a system would work that has these credits and vouchers, and how technology, this particular technology, would help them be earned incrementally.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of ties into the same thing that I was thinking, right? So when you're up for formal education, right, there's this system of accreditation that you were talking about, right? But there's also now this notion that I can obtain knowledge through choice, right? I'm not here to debate whether or not choice is the right way to go about educating people. I'm just here to say it is a way of educating people. It exists. There's models for it, right?
What's the way people are educating themselves today? The new generation is educating themselves by choice. They're forced into the formal education, but they're choosing their path, and they're Googling and they're researching what they want to learn. They're figuring it out in 5 minutes, and they're doing it.
Yeah. And on top of that, there's, the places that you go to gain education has also come to having choice. I think at least in the majority of states, there is some notion of choice on how someone is educated. So if you're a parent, you get to choose, private school or public school or some mix, or, do you go to a parochial school or something, or they come up with a way of being able to offer some sort of reimbursement if you choose a private option or something. Those are messed up and mixed. And so like if you go, for example, having just put someone in private school for the first time this past year, I kind of went through all this. But if you try and find out what the rules are in your state for being able to educate a kid, right? It'll give you all these things, and then it'll go, now you have to go check the law on this and on this and on this, and based on what district you're in, there's all these different rules for things, because there's no common way of quantifying what an education means, which is kind of getting to what you were talking about, right? If we come up with a means by which the masses sort of vote their way into what is represented by an edu token or whatever, now you've got a common way that you can use to put those tokens towards what these different choices are, either as a parent or as a student in the wider world. But until you've got a common way of doing that, you're never going to get consensus. Even across a county, it's going to be different, much less, across a state or across a nation.
Very interesting.
So while I'm usually against the notion of autonomous organizations from a voting perspective, I do think that being able to quantify opinion through a democratic mechanism like a DAO would be a way that you could attach some common understanding or some common value to the idea of education, which can then that common value can be attached to a thing like a private school or a particular class that you're going to take, or a parochial experience or something like that. So
very interesting. It reminds me of the books I used to read. When I was 4, I was an avid reader, and I used to love the Choose Your Own Adventure books. It was like that I lived for that. Like I would, at my great grandmother's house, I would curl up in the bedroom and I just couldn't get enough of them. And I would read them every single way, make every single choice, then grab the next one. Read every single one, read every single choice. I think the way I'm hearing what you're saying here is you have this sort of like, all of these things qualify to equal this thing. Which one applies to you? And you receive the same token, the same qualification, in quotes, like generally, but you've learned it your way. You've also chosen what it is that you want to learn. There's a lot to what you're saying here that I think completely reinvents education, my friend. Like completely. If you take everything that we know in our current structure out, and so you're starting from ground zero for humans to grow and for humans to learn what they're passionate about, to who you naturally are and your strongest gifts that you've been given, to funnel it into your best possible outcome with the power of choice.
Right. And it works both ways. You can use it to represent what you know. Schools can, and schools and programs can represent it to show what they teach. Parents, educators, and students can use it to make choices accordingly. Right? They all sort of tie together. And because you can now have a common way of quantifying qualitative experiences, you can do something useful with thumbs up or ratings. Like Yelp is great, but you get the I stubbed my toe on the way into the place, so I gave it a 1 rating, right? Kind of problem, right? But now, because there's no common way of pushing that down and up again, now you've got a means that allows you to take that kind of qualitative recommendation and experience structure and putting it into the same mechanism without diluting the overall experience, or overall meaning of the value. So I'm saying.
And that's why I think you would need a non-fungible token for the system that you're describing to exist. I don't think you could do it without having a tamper-proof, transparent, secure, digital way of recording this and accountability. At the very least, it makes it, I think, plausible and gets rid of a lot of the potential problems out there around, well, how do I trust a system like this? How do we know it was you that took the test? How do we know it was you that did the thing? How do it was you that did anything, really, right? That's super interesting. So I hope that everyone who is listening to this point, has followed us along, has either been inspired by something that you're doing in the education space, has thought deeper around what it is that can be accomplished with non-fungible tokens, particularly, hopefully, SIOs and our own version of that, and how the future of education and technology can really create the freedom that we need to learn how we want to learn, to choose what we want to learn, and also to be able to look at someone's education beyond just the transcript. I think that's, if there's anything that I would surmise, what I'm saying and what I've said is going beyond the transcript. And I think what Ryan has touched on as well is going beyond the transcript. What have I learned? What does my education look like? What am I capable of doing? Right? What have I learned, and how have I learned it? Am I a hands-on learner? Am I a book learner? Am I a classroom learner? All of those things I think are super freaking interesting. We talk about the social identity of who I am, who Ryan is, who you are. Wow, this has been a lot. It's gotten a lot deeper, Ryan, for our first session than I even thought it would. Great job on this. And if you want to get a hold of us, obviously just hit the link. Our contact information is right there. We'd love to learn about what you're doing in the education field. We don't pretend to know it all. Even if we spoke for 50 hours on the subject, we would never touch everything. And we're always here to learn. Thank you for tuning in.